Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today at our virtual panel titled What is Research Excellence? Measuring Impact in a Changing World. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that while we are meeting virtually, we are all joining from various traditional territories across Turtle Island. I am joining you today from Halifax, which is the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq and Wabanaki peoples. We recognize the enduring presence and resilience of Indigenous peoples across Canada, and we're grateful for the opportunity to gather and share knowledge on these lands. I invite our attendees to share their own land acknowledgements in the chat as we get started. Before we dive into our discussion, we have an exciting update regarding accessibility. Today, we're testing simultaneous interpretation through the Wordly app right here on Zoom. To participate, for captions, you should see an option on your screen to enable the Wordly app, and you can select your preferred language to see a live transcript of our conversation. For audio, we're dropping a special link in the chat right now. So if you open that link in a separate browser tab or on your mobile device, you'll be able to listen to the live audio in either English or French. When using the web link for audio, please mute the main Zoom window to avoid hearing two voices at once. And since we're piloting this technology to make our panels more inclusive, we would appreciate your patience and would love your feedback as we work to increase bilingual accessibility for our audience and to break down language barriers in real time. Now, I would like to introduce today's moderator. Amélie Canel-Vallet is an inaugural chair and professor in the Department of Equity, Ethics, and Policy of the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, and a professor in the Department of Sociology at McGill University. From 2015 to 2025, she held the Canada Research Chair in Policies and Health Inequalities. Amélie's research examines the contribution of policies to social inequalities in health over the life course. She has demonstrated experience in providing strategic advice to several complex organizations, notably the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, where she served as a board member for 6 years. Amélie is the co-chair of the National Killam Program Selection Committee, which is responsible for recommending winners for the esteemed Killam Prizes, Dorothy Killam Fellowships, and the Killam NRC Paul Corkum Fellowships. I will now pass it on to Amélie for an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Bakmala, and welcome everyone. I'm genuinely delighted to be here, both as a moderator and as someone who's been deeply embedded in the work that we'll talk about today. The question at the heart of today's session, what is research excellence, sounds deceptively simple, but anyone who has sat on an adjudication committee knows that the answer is anything but. At the National Killam Program, we're guided notably by the insightful words of that Dorothy Killam imparted in her will that was dated December 1964. First, I'm seeing folks asking if there's an echo. Is the sound okay from my side? Okay, thank you. So first, Dorothy Killam stated a purpose, and that is to help in the building of Canada's future by encouraging advanced study. Next, she specified attributes of the Killam awardees in that they should be likely to contribute to the advancement of learning or to win distinction in a profession, but that a Killam scholar should not be a one-sided person. And finally, quite ahead of our time and germane to our discussion today, she also cited the importance of inclusion in that no person shall be qualified or disqualified as a Killam scholar on account of his or her race or religious opinions. So the Killam programs strive to uphold these principles through all their practices and notably through their selection processes. And today in this panel, we want to offer you an evidence-informed example of how to operationalize these principles. Because we're going to be drawing on a process that has been running for 3 years, producing data that we can and have analyzed. And we've assembled here a group of colleagues who have lived this process from the inside. Before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. So please use the Q&A feature for questions. We'll get to audience questions between 12:10 and 12:25 Eastern Time. And if you'd like to see a question answered, please upvote it rather than repost it. It helps us prioritize. Use the chat as you have already for technical questions, beer-free actions. And also, we'll be launching a few audience polls as we go to keep you on your feet. And so please respond. We want to hear you. Your responses will generally shape our conversation. So please participate. Speaking of which, the CSPC will now launch a brief demographic poll to help us understand who's in the room today. Okay. Once we've had a view of who is in the room, the CSPC will be sharing the results. We're good to go. The sooner you participate, the sooner we can go ahead. Let me know, folks, CSPC, if the results are ready. I don't have the window up. Maybe I'm... Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so majority academia, but lovely to see lots of folks from government as well. This breadth of context is exactly where these practices need to take root. So thank you. So we can bring that demographic poll down now. Thank you. So now let me turn to introduce the remarkable group of colleagues that we have assembled today. All four of are members of the National Killam Selection Committee, and all four are co-authors of the paper that we'll be presenting briefly, along with some other colleagues who couldn't be here today. Let's start with Meidiane. Meidiane Andrade is the Dean of the Faculty of Science at York University and the outgoing chair of the National Killam Selection Committee. As chair, in close collaboration with the National Killam Program Office, Meidiane led the design of a rigorous and fair adjudication process that has become a genuine model for the field. She's internationally recognized for her research on ecology, evolution, and behavior, and equally for her commitment to building more inclusive academic cultures as founder of the Toronto Initiative for Diversity and Excellence and co-founder and inaugural president of the Canadian Black Scientists Network. Next, we have Carl James, who holds the Jean Augustine Chair in Education, Community, and Diaspora at York University, where he is also a distinguished research professor. Carl is himself a Killam Prize laureate in the social sciences. His work examines how institutional policies structure the lived experiences, educational trajectories, and social outcomes of marginalized Canadians, a perspective that brings vital texture to how we think about what research should accomplish. Bilkis Visanjay est professeure à la Faculté des sciences infirmières et chercheuse associée au Centre de recherche en santé publique de l'Université de Montréal. Elle préside le comité provincial pour la prestation des services de santé aux personnes issues de communautés ethnoculturelles du Québec et a joué un rôle fondateur dans la création de l'Institut universitaire Sherpa. I hope Wordly did its job. And finally, Bill Whelan is a professor in the Department of Physics at UPEI in Biomedical Sciences at the Atlantic Veterinary College. His research focuses on optical sensors, photoacoustic imaging, and laser therapies for cancer detection and treatment. Bill is also co-chair of the PEI Education Ministers Advisory Council on Lifelong Learning and a former president of the Canadian Association of Physicists. So with that, we're now going to turn to a brief session, a brief staging for the work we're here to discuss. And if we could pull up the slides, please. So as I briefly mentioned, all five of us on this panel here are co-authors of a paper we just submitted to Facets Journal, along with five other colleagues who can all be here today. And what you'll see in the next 15 minutes or so is a sneak preview of the key findings from this work that are kind of setting the stage for our discussion as well. The National Killam Program has given us something generally rare, a high-stakes national adjudication process that is ready to be studied. So we'll start with Meidiane, who will walk us through the architecture of the process, and then we'll provide you with a teaser of what the data reveal. Meidiane.
Thank you so much, Amelie, and thank you to CSPC for hosting this and NRC for supporting us. Now, when I was first asked to be chair of the Killam Selection Committee, it was in its first year of administration by the National Research Council, and it was under a renewed and revised set of guidelines that clearly expressed the goal of an inclusive and holistic review process. But the operational side of the process had not yet been determined. And the Killam Trust and the National Killam Advisory Board empowered me to co-create an implementation plan that aligned with the literature on equitable assessment in collaboration with the National Killam Program Office. That is an extremely rare opportunity, and I encourage other organizations to think about actually empowering chairs to implement some of these things. So if we go to the next slide, let me take you into the process itself. Assessment is built around 3 sequential stages, each with specific mechanisms that are designed to interrupt the points where the literature says that bias most commonly enters into peer review. So stage 1 on your far left is the submission pool. At that point, every file receives 2 independent expert peer reviews, common in most processes. But then the National Killam Program Office creates ranking groups based on the external review scores. They then share both the scores and the reviewer narratives with the non-voting chairs, in this case, myself and Amelie. And the non-voting chairs review all of the files. We give each of them our own categorical ranking, and we typically don't look at the scores, with the exception of when we're trying to do a deep read to understand why peer reviewers scored the way they did. And this is the distinctive part that we introduced to the process. The National Killam Program Office will flag all submissions where there are significant score differentials, any case where 2 expert reviewers have rated the same file very differently, and also cases where the reviewer narrative and the scores don't seem to match, or the reviewer narratives are so short that it's hard to see how they justify the score. High differentials lead to lower average scores, and in some studies, in particular one that looked at CIHR data, they're more common in files for women. So those flagged files, we, the non-voting chairs, read very deeply. If a low score appears to be poorly justified, we can have it removed from the ranking process, and that rank is then recalculated. So this is not a passive process. In stage 2, we have the development of the proposed consideration pool. The National Killam Program Office uses the chair's categorical rankings, the rankings from the consideration pool, and then they combine these to get an estimate of which files should be in the consideration pool that move on for further assessment by the committee. Now, I want to emphasize that the files are all excellent. The consideration pool is determined partly by a predetermined target number of submissions that it's actually feasible to review. So that determines how deep into this pool of excellent files we go. And here's a second feature I want to draw to your attention. Before the selection committee has seen any submissions, they then review aggregated representation data that the program office has put together into visualizations. They compare the proposed pool relative to the submission pool, the original set of candidates, and they're looking for gaps. Now, any person on the selection committee at this point can identify a gap that they're concerned about, a place where representation has dropped off, and then the program office will go back, they will review the submissions within 1 point of the cutoff, and then they will elevate some of the excellent files that could help to close those gaps if they're there. So again, these are outstanding files. They just didn't quite make the place where we put the cutoff base on our capacity. So the committee's first substantive act, before they see any files, before they see any names, is a demographic audit. And this is done with no knowledge of the self-identification of any one candidate. Stage 3 is the consideration pool assessment. And here, the scores are not shared with the selection committee, only the narratives that we got from the external peer reviews. Each candidate is evaluated by 2 committee members using the same rubric as the external peer reviewers, that same rubric that is available publicly for all the candidates to use when they're putting together their applications. Committee members have a full 6 to 8 weeks to complete their evaluations, and that time is critical. In the selection meetings, every submission gets equal airtime, and no candidate can be removed without consideration through a thorough discussion. This process is overseen by the non-voting chairs, and together with the program office, as the process goes along, we provide summaries of what we're hearing to guide the group towards consensus. So what you're looking at is a process that's designed from the ground up to preserve expert judgment from peer reviewers while systematically blocking the channels through which bias typically flows. And with that, I'll hand it back to Amelie.
Thank you, Meidian. If we can go to the next slide, I'm going to show you some results of this process, and then Meidian will close with the back end. So this is what the data show, focusing on the Dorothy Killam Fellowships. So this is a Sankey diagram, a flow chart, if you will, that is tracing candidates from submission through to award over the 3 competition cycles from 23 to 25. 2023 to 2025. And at every stage, we've broken down the pool down by gender, and these 3 kind of points, nodes mirror what Meidian just spoke to. So you see that at submission, we start with 59% women in the pool, 41% men. This is maintained through consideration. And at award, we have awarded prizes, the Dorothy Killam Fellowships, to 62% women, 38% men. So women went in representing 59% of the submission pool and came out representing 62% of awardees. So the process not only held parity, it slightly exceeded it. And I also want to note here that we have put the labor force availability benchmark that you can see in the lower right corner. So 44.7% of full-time teaching staff at Canadian universities are women. But of course, this reflects, this is an averaging of different ranks, and we know that there are imbalances at higher ranks as well. And the Dorothy Killam is a mid-career award. So the submission pool itself already reflects a pipeline that overrepresents women relative to the eligible population, and the adjudication process honors that throughout. We see a comparable story for the Killam Prize. For reasons of time, we won't share it today, but you'll hopefully be able to see the full paper soon. Speaking to a question also in the chat, link to copies of the presentation. The paper is not yet out in print, but we will be sure to share it with folks when it comes out. If and when it comes out, we'll be sharing it with folks who were present in this talk today. So back to the data, this is good news, but it didn't just happen by chance, and Meidian will give a little bit of the context that produces these data. So back to you, Meidian.
Thank you, Amelie. If I could get the next slide, please. So we're showing you here scores for gender, and I want to point out that we also have other aspects of self-identification, which we're not showing here, and which we didn't put into the paper because of the fact that we don't yet have a big enough sample size. So we're planning to do another analysis later. But what you see here is the way the process and the outcomes come together in a particularly striking way. So on the left, if we start there, this slide shows a scatter plot for the Dorothy Killam Fellowship consideration pool. On the left are the external peer review scores. On the right are the selection committee scores for the same files. Now, the pie charts at each point show you the gender breakdown of candidates who meet or exceed the score that you're looking at. So if you look first at the left panel, from scores 12 through score 16, which is the high score here, the gender breakdown is essentially flat. So those pie charts look very similar. 41% men, 59% women getting the score of 12 through 16 or above. Now, this mirrors the submission pool. But as the threshold rises towards 18, you see some fluctuation. And at the very highest score, 100% of candidates are men. Now, granted, this is a small sample size, but this is very consistent with what is seen in the literature with respect to peer review scores. And more importantly, if we compare that to the right panel, these are the scores from the selection committee on the same files, where we use gender-neutral pronouns in discussing those files, and where we have not seen individual self-identification data. Here, the gender distribution actually tilts towards women at the higher score thresholds. At a score of 17, 68% are women. At the score of 18, it's 50-50. And this tells us something meaningful. When the selection committee evaluates candidates using only the narratives with no access to peer review scores, they're not replicating whatever skew may be present in the external review process. If anything, they're correcting for it. So this is the mechanism working as it was designed to do. The anonymization of scores before committee deliberation, the rubric, the deep read function. These are not just procedural niceties. They're creating measurably different outcomes than what you would get from a process that simply passes external review scores downstream. And we really think this represents a scalable model, not specific to the Killam program, but applicable to any high-stakes national or institutional adjudication process that is seeking to align its practices with its stated values about research excellence and equity while preserving the process, but also privacy of the candidates who provided their self-identification data. I'll pass it back to Amelie.
Thank you, Meidan, and we can end the slideshow here and bring back all our panelists. Thank you. So what we described here, as I said, is just a teaser, but I think we hope will be seen as a proof of concept. But it's also, I think, a provocation because these mechanisms are not secret. They are well documented and they're founded on solid evidence. And they're not prohibitively expensive. They do require commitment, consistency, and the willingness to look at your data honestly. And I'll allow myself here a little moment to thank the Killam trustees for their trust of this process and to the Killam program staff for their unwavering support and responsiveness through many rounds of data analysis. So back to the question for today's panel, what does it take to actually do this? And what does it mean for how we define and recognize excellence more broadly? So let's turn to that conversation. And I'd like to begin with a question for Carl. So Carl, what is the National Killam Program's definition of research excellence and how is it integrated into the work of the selection committee? I'll ask you to unmute.
Sorry. Thanks very much for your question. Thanks for us being in this conversation. Yes, the idea of research excellence is one that we always would grapple with and which everyone will be quite happy to explore. The challenge is that even if all of us use the same understanding or definition of research excellence, we're not applying the same interpretation or same understanding to it. And therefore, the program seeks then to define or look at research excellence in ways that enables access and opportunities and engage in a more holistic understanding of the research process and what people are trying to do with the work that they're presenting. So we see an interplay between the context and assessment, and so we do not play one without the other. And in looking at research excellence, then, we understand we each bring our respective disciplinary expertise to that research, and we use that expertise that we have to understand, interpret, and the fact that we're able to do an exchange, talk between ourselves, knowing that we understand what's being presented to us with our respective ideas and so forth. We also bring the understanding of societal context, the political, the social, the cultural, and awareness of this, therefore, is also important. And we also think of change is an inevitability, and therefore, with that dynamism, we're going to constantly be paying attention to how we interpret in excellence, how excellence in the current context might be different from and thought through differently than in another context. So therefore, we see this as a dynamic process, not leaving any of these things out of it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Carl, for setting the stage. And so, folks, now we'd like to turn to you to understand a little bit more on your perspective. So we have a second poll for you, where we would like to ask you, how familiar are you with the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which is driving some of the principles that of adjudication that we use here at the Killam and that Carl talked about. So we're giving you a few minutes with this information, with this poll. And so for those who don't know the DORA, I highly recommend that you have a look at these principles. We try, what you heard from Carl is an example of is a concrete illustration of this, and we try to implement them as well. And so, yes, just a heads up that we will have some French coming up. So please turn on your translation to English. And the CSPC has helpfully provided this. So can we have a look at the responses from the DORA poll? Thank you. Okay, so we have a bit of a split on this group. A lot of folks are familiar with the DORA, but not necessarily have implemented it. So hopefully we can provide you with some useful guidance here. And folks who are not yet familiar with DORA, please look it up. You can have your organization sign up to this assessment, to this declaration, and spread the word. Thank you. So now we'll turn to Median, and I think the important point here, taking away from the DORA, is that it takes more than familiarity with principles to shift practice. And Median, you've been in a position to observe this directly. So can you tell us more about what are the patterns of bias that emerge in the assessment of scholarly research, and how do they impact scholarship?
Thank you so much, Amelie. And thanks to everyone who's making efforts to implement the DORA principles for a holistic assessment, for thinking about impact more than just what academics have traditionally called excellence, which doesn't always talk about how things get into public use, how our publicly funded research can assist society, nor things like multiplier effects through mentorship, through how we train the next generation of scientists. And really, when you come right down to it, the ways in which we frame our thoughts about assessment based on traditions, academic traditions of what is counted and what is rewarded, those are biases. So there's one class of biases related to people's identities, and we showed you an example of how some of that might obtain in peer review scores, and there are lots of data on that, showing that for the same estimates of quality or quality of the candidate or the work, women, racialized people often are scored lower than people who are from the statistically dominant group. So that's sort of one class of bias. And I think it's important we keep in mind that this doesn't mean people are evil and trying to, it's part of the system that we're in that allows things to, expectations based on traditional patterns to dictate what constitutes excellence rather than the more time-consuming way of assessing perhaps impact on positive impact. So one of the things about assessment, of course, is that how we are assessed, how funding bodies assess us, affect where people put their efforts. It affects what gets funded and what gets rewarded. And so it shapes not just the research enterprise, but our ability to have the positive impact that I think most of us want to have on society. So that also means, though, that funding bodies, Killam and similar organizations, the tri-agencies, they can implement practices that can lead to widespread changes in people's scholarly work. So rather than having the risk of biases leaning towards, say, just how many papers you publish and the impact factor of those papers, once our assessment mechanisms emphasize, do you actually take your work into the public sphere? How many graduate students do you supervise? And do you ensure that they're able to become successful in their careers, whether that's in taking forward fundamental research or working in some applied field? Once we add these things into our metrics and remove the biases of tradition that don't necessarily always assess excellence and impact, but rather, I would say, often default towards the ease of review, right? Counting rather than evaluating, then we might see a different kind of a system. And the thing that becomes very clear when we work in a process like Killam is that it is essential that we have that more holistic approach to understanding people's impact. What did they want to accomplish, and then how did they accomplish it? Because when you're looking at an interdisciplinary competition, as we do in the Killam process, you simply cannot compare apples and oranges in terms of some of these traditional metrics. So I would say the biases are very well documented. We have to start acknowledging just how much the biases that are built in to our systems can influence the research that is actually done. And DORA principles, the types of things that Killam is doing, the types of initiatives that the Tri-Council, the tri-agencies are implementing, all of these things can change the scholarly enterprise and tie us more closely, I think, to the goals of that Mrs. Dorothy Killam talked about, right? Advanced study, the whole person, and how we contribute to society. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Meijian. So folks on the panel, does this map onto what you've observed from your respective disciplines and community? Briefly, is there something you want to add? OK. So then, ce que Médiane vient de décrire, c'est en partie un problème de définition. Qui décide qui compte comme recherche de qualité? In Bilkis, your work is deeply embedded in community context where that question has particular weight. So can you please tell us what types of contributions could receive greater recognition within the research landscape and what steps can be taken to strengthen their visibility and their impact?
Merci pour la question. Alors, je pense que vous avez demandé à ce que les collègues qui nous écoutent puissent mettre leur traduction en anglais. Je vais tenter de répondre en étant cohérente à l'inclusivité que nous offre cette session aujourd'hui. Nous sommes au Canada, donc nous tentons de parler également français et également merci de donner cette option Wordly. Je l'ai testé et ça marche très bien, en tout cas pour des francophones. La traduction est très raisonnable. Donc merci pour la question et au fil des expériences aussi des années en tant que membre du comité de sélection des prix et bourses à Fondation Killam, on apprend énormément et je voudrais faire écho donc à la réponse de ma collègue Médiane et le mini-sondage qui vient d'être passé pour mettre de l'avant effectivement les réflexions qui s'inscrivent en cohérence avec les principes de la déclaration de San Francisco sur l'évaluation de la recherche, donc DORA, qui appelle donc, en lien avec ta question, Amélie, à dépasser les indicateurs bibliométriques traditionnels tels que le facteur d'impact comme principale mesure de l'excellence scientifique. Et nous en avons parlé beaucoup au sein de nos discussions avec la Fondation Killam. Par rapport à la question, Amélie, euh, on voudrait encourager notre audience à réfléchir donc aux stratégies à considérer dans l'adoption et la mise en œuvre concrète de ces principes, notamment, je pense, par la nécessité de mieux valoriser en réponse à ce qu'on doit considérer des recherches évidemment interdisciplinaires, plus appliquées, des démarches de co-construction qui peuvent prendre du temps, mais qui sont essentielles avec les communautés concernées, une diversité dans la mobilisation des connaissances, souvent en évaluant des projets ou des parcours de vie, parce que ce sont des parcours de vie qu'on nous soumet, hein, que vous avez présenté tout à l'heure dans les diapos. Cela va au-delà de la mobilisation des connaissances classiques scientifiques. L'impact sociétal, le mentorat, le renforcement des capacités, l'intégration des savoirs qu'on dit expérientiels, des savoirs euh, autochtones qui sont issus de la pratique. Donc, je pense, en résumé, que les défis actuels sont de plus en plus complexes au niveau sociétal. Les inégalités de santé, les changements climatiques, ça ne peut pas être plus simple à l'avenir. Des éléments à considérer. Donc, je suis très contente de pouvoir en parler un petit peu aujourd'hui pour voir comment on rend ces complexités sociétales plus tangibles dans les rapports d'évaluation, par exemple. Merci.
Et merci, Bilkis. Donc, je pense que ces questions sont toujours importantes and your perspective is really critical for us to understand how we can bring those perspectives here into greater context. So I don't know if folks in the panel have anything to add, if you wanted to bring back this question. Yes, Médiane, please go ahead.
I guess I would just say quickly, Bilkis, the different types of approaches that you described, we have to start accepting that some of these things take more time, as you said. And if they take more time, then we have to actually enumerate the steps that would be expected for someone engaged in responsible community engaged research, for example. And then each of those has to actually garner positive assessment itself. So this doesn't mean that there are no criteria. It doesn't mean that you say, oh, I'm doing community-based research, so I'll talk to you in 20 years. It means that we all have to agree that there's good ways to do things, and that is what we should be assessing as a pathway to the what might be a final result, which is what the community has asked for. So thank you for that.
Exactly. And if I may just quickly react to that, looping back to our duty that you give us as members of this committee, was to look for those elements of concrete, true partnership in those letters of collaboration that are submitted. And they're not just like, quote unquote, copy paste, but truly we could see what you're saying, Median, in terms of the concrete steps taken to actually build those partnerships and then expecting those impacts.
Yes, and as the field evolves, this is also the process, our evaluation processes also have to be in lockstep with that as well. So it's an evergreen process and an important one. So on that, we also wanted to ask you with another little poll, what are the barriers to implementing new, more inclusive assessment practices from your perspective, from your organization's perspective? And here you can check all that apply. So it goes from lack of clear guidelines or frameworks to resistance to change. Of course, institutions are, I'm a sociologist by training, so there's that feature of institutions that once they get into their own focus areas, they can have that that feature. So we're just going to give you a couple of seconds, minutes to think about this and provide your feedback to us. And with the CSPC sharing when we see a good representation. And thank you also for sharing your questions as we go along in the Q&A. You'll see that our team has started answering some of these questions and others. And thank you for upvoting those questions as well, so that we can start thinking about our answers for the Q&A session, Q&A part of this talk. So do we have a sense of what are the barriers to implementing new, more inclusive assessment practices from the audience, from the CSPC? Okay, so a pretty, well, of course, select all that apply. So pretty much across the board, some barriers that folks are experiencing. Resistance to change certainly seems to be the modal category. And otherwise, there's a good number. So hopefully, in some of these features, we can, again, the Killam process hopefully can provide some guidance, as well as, of course, some of the resources that were shared in the chat by colleagues on the DORA. Bilkis, you wanted to react?
Yes, I find that really, révélateur, this poll really, especially I want to just highlight the fact that 51% indicated the concerns about fairness. And that's exactly what we're discussing in terms of broadening definitions of research excellence. So I find that the discussion today really, take us to thoughtful and rigorous sort of thoughts about how do we implement all that. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I think c'est un miroir utile qu'on voit ici, and les obstacles sont à la fois structurels et culturels, so structural and cultural barriers. And so that brings us to a question to Bill, who you've worked at the intersection of research and institutional governance. And so in your perspective, what practical steps can be taken by institutions to uphold fair assessment?
Well, thank you for the question, Emily. I've got a few steps here in using in my experience with the Killam program as an example. I realize that many institutions and organizations may already be using some of these steps, but certainly looking at the poll that we just saw the results from in terms of lack of clear guidelines, concerns about consistency and fairness, that I think some of these steps would help to address that. First of all, I'd suggest it's important to leverage faculty expertise in the specific ways in which bias can manifest in peer review, to engage with faculty or institutional experts, local institutional experts, in evaluating your current practices and approaches for the adjudications of awards and grants. From the use of inclusive language across all communications, the training of the reviewers, as well as in the design of rubrics, would be important. Specifically with rubrics, I think many institutions do this, but it's critically important to publish your evaluation rubric. Make it easily accessible to candidates, to nominators, to peer reviewers. In the case of Killam, the external peer reviewers and my colleagues here on the National Selection Committee, we use a common evaluation rubric, which is accessible online. So we're using the same rubric as the external peer reviewers, which I think helps in the question of consistency. It's important to provide clear instructions. Thinking back to just one of the barrier comments, it's important to provide clear instructions to candidates, and equally important to correlate all submission materials to the assessment criteria and the process of evaluation. In the case of the Killam Awards, there are published FAQ pages for the application process and evaluation process. And I wanted to highlight one as an example. So the FAQs for the Dorothy Killam Fellowships includes explicitly what is expected in a knowledge mobilization plan. So nominees, candidates submit a knowledge mobilization plan. So it's very clear what's expected. And this language correlates directly with the rubric used by the reviewers. And this includes as well good direction to nominators and candidates. As an example, directly from the FAQ, it states that strong Dorothy Killam Fellowship submissions contain knowledge mobilization plans that are clear, tangible, and demonstrate a commitment to shared knowledge beyond the academic community. And that's a key evaluator of impact within the Killam programs. Other steps, providing expected word counts per each assessment item. For example, with Killam, the nomination letter and the 3 letters of support, it's 1,000 words in English, 1,200 words in French. So it's important to state that up front. Provide clear instructions to letter writers, encourage writers to address the different aspects, the varied aspects of the scholar's work, and also the scholar's research leadership. Ensure that the letter writers in support of an application are aware of the evaluation rubric, which I think Killam does very well. And since Killam, the panel is as Median and Emily indicated at the start, we're an interdisciplinary panel from different backgrounds. So one of the directions to the letter writers is to ensure that the letter is written in plain language, using clear and simple terms that a non-specialized audience could understand. So certainly these letters of nomination and letters of support will contain a lot of detailed information on the specific discipline, but there needs to be a clarity in plain language around impact and what has been accomplished. The letter writers are effectively instructed to provide a holistic review of the candidate's file and impact in its many forms. And one example within Killam, the Killam Prize, in terms of that direction, is letter writers are asked to consider the quality of the nominee's research record achieved in line with Killam values and Killam attributes, depending on the award. And for the Killam values include information about being an inclusive collaborator, a barrier breaker, and a research leader. And also to reduce potential unconscious bias in the evaluation process, nominators, letter writers are encouraged to refer to nominees by their surnames and gender neutral pronouns. I think that was mentioned earlier. And finally, time. We talked about making sure this is an efficient process, and one needs to ensure that there's sufficient time built into the review process for meaningful discussion and subsequent reflection on the candidate's file. And within the Killam process, as an example, I would say that there is time built in, and this for me is an exemplar of providing enough time. That at least 24 hours after the discussion of the file, you have time to reflect not only on your rankings, but your own notes as a result of the discussion and the program officer's notes. So you have time to reflect on this before proceeding to identifying a top tier. And I realize time is difficult to extract and to utilize, but it is a critical part, I think, of a holistic fair assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And yes, time is precious. And you folks, the committee has been extremely generous in their time, and the staff as well. So this is, when I said these processes are perhaps not that onerous, time and commitment is really built into this process. But we have some thoughts on how that can be done. And, the point is to start trying to implement this. So your questions, Bill's response, I don't know if folks from the panel wanted to add something to Bill's response. No. Yes, absolutely. Very thorough description of our process. And it's, it is a lot of time, but when we get down to it, there's also, as many of you who have sat on adjudication committee know, there's that moment where there's flow in the committee, and it comes together in such an important way. So I think Bill's response brings us to a question that matters particularly for research that operates at the margins of traditional academic metrics. As Médiane said, in certain ways, if we could only rely on the traditional academic metrics, we would be done much, much quicker. But what we're trying to assess is really this impact beyond those academic metrics, including them, but also beyond them. And Bilquis, I'm going to come back to you. Your work has always straddled that boundary between institutional and community knowledge. So can you tell us a little bit more about what insights can the research community draw from the National Killam's program approach to recognizing and assessing community-based research? And I guess vous allez retourner en français, tu vas retourner en français. Donc, folks, if you are ready to, plug in that worldly and be able to listen to Bilquis.
Merci pour la question, puis merci pour la flexibilité de l'audience à être technologiquement avancée pour pouvoir nous permettre en même temps de tester comment ça marche. La qualité du français est toujours un enjeu. D'ailleurs, je vais en profiter pour faire un mini détour à ta question, Amélie, que j'apprécie énormément, en indiquant effectivement que le savoir scientifique inclut également des savoirs qui sont générés en français. Et que parfois on a l'impression que on se doit d'écrire en anglais, on se doit d'écrire absolument, démontrer des éléments qui sont écrits en anglais. C'est sûr que la science, au départ, et la langue de la science est l'anglais. Cependant, je pense que si je reviens à ta question, dans l'approche que nous offre le programme national Killam, nous permet justement d'être ouverts à cette diversité-là et de pouvoir comprendre la spécificité, la contribution des mots qui sont utilisés. On fait souvent ça dans nos évaluations. Qu'est-ce qu'ils veulent dire par ça exactement? Et c'est là où parfois la recherche dans la communauté devient compliquée à essayer de comprendre l'impact des mots. Et donc pour en revenir à ta question de façon plus sérieuse et directe, je dirais que l'approche du programme Killam nous permet justement, d'une part, on en a parlé tout à l'heure, de l'importance du partenariat multidisciplinaire et intersectoriel dans le contexte justement, comme disait Médiane, de prendre le temps de ce que veut dire les conceptions de l'excellence et l'impact en recherche. Donc, à mon avis, les points qu'on retient, c'est cette reconnaissance du fait que l'excellence en recherche peut se manifester et devrait être mesurée ainsi, entre guillemets, au-delà des critères dits classiques, que la contribution sociétale, donc dans les recherches qu'on fait dans la communauté, nous mène à un engagement durable, des retombées transformatrices au sein des communautés. Euh, je dirais également que le programme met en lumière les savoirs expérientiels de plus en plus. Et c'est pour ça que je trouvais que l'introduction avec cette image qu'on retrouve de qui soumet au début et où est-ce qu'on se retrouve après est très parlante dans l'évolution qu'on doit avoir dans la production des connaissances. Quand on parle de plus inclusif, plus collaboratif, ce sont des mots mais qui requiert justement des actions à mettre en place pour nous, au milieu académique et producteur de sciences, mais aussi pour des fondations comme Kilam de ensuite d'aller, entre guillemets, les mesurer, pleinement mesurer à l'aide d'indicateurs dont on a parlé, non seulement bibliométriques traditionnels, bien sûr, c'est important, mais aussi de regarder ce qui est peut-être moins tangible dans le renforcement des capacités, dans la... Je dirais je me rappelle d'une conversation qu'on a eue à un moment donné où peut-être des personnes qui viennent de NRC comme Bill nous disaient What does it mean to build confidence? C'est quoi la relation de confiance qu'on a construit avec des populations pour faire émerger justement ces données de recherche qui nous parlent des enjeux sociétaux? Quand on a des tableaux, souvent quand Bill nous parle, on a des tableaux avec plein de chiffres en arrière. Et ces chiffres-là sont importants, mais en même temps les paroles des communautés. Donc je dirais que le programme nous apprend énormément à considérer une intersection de ces éléments-là, à mobiliser pour nous, chercheurs, organismes de financement. Et finalement, je dirais que dans l'ensemble, on a un modèle inspirant ici pour l'évolution des mécanismes de reconnaissance. On sait, on sait, on parle, mais je crois qu'aujourd'hui, on a l'opportunité vraiment de mettre un peu le doigt dessus pour dire oui, on est là quand on parle de recherche transformatrice, quand on parle de l'excellence et on n'est pas dans une élite, on est dans la société de tous les jours qui a besoin de ces savoirs. Merci.
Merci, Bilkis. Je pense que le mot que je retiens, c'est en effet inspirant et transformateur. And so what we've been circling is a systemic question. And we do think, we hope that one answer that the Killam process offers is transparency as a lever. So if you've had a look at the website, you'll see it's been described as one of the most thorough FAQ that I've seen by one of my colleagues. And, we have videos and documentation, and as Bill pointed to, the rubrics, criteria, everything is out there, and we do abide by it very strongly. And so I want to turn to, and I think having a platform like this, a panel like this, and I want to address questions that have been asked. The recording will be available, not the slides quite yet. Please hold off for the paper, and we will send you the paper as soon as it is published. We really dearly hope that it will be published soon. So we are trying to be as transparent as we can. And so to that, I want to turn it over to Carl to tell us a little bit about how can transparency in the selection process influence broader change? Yes.
I think many of us and others who have talked so far have hinted at transparency and the significance of transparency. For example, when Bill talked about the letters that people would write, and and we in those letters we're thinking of looking at barrier breakers, research leaders, and inclusive collaborators. Those are signaling what will be looked at. And that for me is an example of transparency. One of the interesting things that came up when we asked about the poll was 7% of the responses was talked about resistance to change. And I think sometimes resistance to change sometimes can be addressed through transparency. What are we using as the factors to assess the understanding? Or I also think being transparent also to a recognition that change is an inevitability. You know, context changes, and therefore we constantly will have to construct things in relation to context, and here's signaling to the audience, to the communities that with whom we're working, will also be a way in which that people might come on board. The other thing about transparency is, and as we talked about earlier, is about excellence. How do we understand excellence? And we give some signals of what are we looking at when we talk of everyone coming with their respective understanding of excellence and the disciplinary ways in which we're going to look at it. That's a signal of transparency and the way we're talking about these things. Earlier, Median talked about bias. And, you know, again, we're going to be we have to be transparent with that concern because we all come with our respective expectations. We come with our respective understanding of the issues, and therefore, sharing those understandings as well make it the process transparent and therefore useful. One last point that I could bring up is the whole idea of for Killam here, we give feedback about the what we have done, how we have done it, and this is in itself as well. This conversation we are having is a way in which Killam is being transparent with the activities and work that we do, and when that paper comes out, it's yet another way in which Killam is being transparent in the work we're doing. And I think that also transparency, knowing what's expected, also builds confidence in the process. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much. Yes, trust, confidence. I think this is what we're trying to build here. So folks, do we have, does anybody want to intervene? Add anything here? Okay. So now we're going to turn to, je vais terminer notre discussion avec, non, pas tout de suite en fait. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. Before we get to what is needed to actually do this, je voulais we want to get to what transparency, what being part of the process does to those who participate in the process. And so, Bill, I want to zoom in on that dimension, the experience of being inside a well-designed process and what it does to you. So can you speak to how participating in the selection committee has influenced how you participate in other processes and evaluations?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Emily, for the question. I mean, just to put this in context, I've been through two cycles of a 3-year term with Killam, and I can say that the experience on the panel has had a profound impact on my approach to assessment and the way I view assessment. I'm part of the 44% who responded to the earlier poll that I was familiar with DORA, but really hadn't been involved in an adjudication process that included so many of principles, of DORA. So in reflecting on the last 2 years, I've become more aware of the important features of a fair assessment process, the importance of a clear rubric that's communicated to everyone associated with a file, including the reviewers, and really the need for the chairs and big thank you to Emily and Mediane in terms of co-chairing our deliberations. The need for the chair to regularly remind the committee of the principles of a holistic assessment, and for the chair in our case of Killam to return frequently to the specified criteria for the award. which in the case of Killam includes Killam values and Killam attributes. So something Carl had just mentioned about, the signaling. There's consistent signaling throughout the entire process that we are looking at, files in the context of the attributes, which are, an inclusive collaborator, looking at, a barrier breaker, as example of some of the attributes. So being consistently reminded of and signaling that focus has been excellent. I mentioned in my earlier remarks, I will reiterate it, recognizing that time is precious, but making sure there's sufficient time built in the process. This was in my view, an exemplar, a fantastic process where we had time to reflect, not just in the meeting, but 24 hours, 48 hours after the meeting, reflect on what was discussed. So I think is an important aspect of it. And at a point that I didn't raise earlier, even after all of that reflection and discussion, there is still time, even after we've identified top tier files, there's still time for any committee member to bring a file forward that they felt there are aspects of this file that should still be considered. And I see this as a step to ensure nothing's missed, from an interdisciplinary panel. So I think that's a fantastic process, and it's had an impact on the way I sort of view, other processes that I've been involved in. And my last point I'll make is what was shared, and I think clearly articulated in the paper that was referred to at the start, is that committee members are regularly invited to share concerns at any point if they feel something in the process or the discussion is deviating from its intended purpose. This is the first time in my career that I've experienced that, and I've been on a number of panels, and I think it's absolutely fantastic because what it does is it helps to establish a cohesive and a collaborative environment among the panelists, and I think that's a key structure that needs to be in place to be able to execute a fair assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Folks on the panel, does this resonate for others? Carl, Bilquis, has being on this committee changed how you evaluate in other contexts? Carl?
Oh, absolutely. What's important here, and I think many of us have said that over and over again, is understanding that we bring our respective understanding to the conversation, and highlighting the fact that the discipline that we work with sometimes will help a particular interpretation. So the exchanges we have in the conversation is very, very useful, I think, as we move towards conclusion.
Absolutely. I can also attest to that as an interdisciplinary joint appointee myself. I have observed that the processes where people come together to commonly understand research excellence or promotions and so on are now really helpful for me, also as chair of a department that is highly interdisciplinarily. So I think if we're saying that this is necessary to tackle the big complex questions, we also need to put some of the mechanisms in place to ensure that we are safely carrying researchers through that process, and also recognizing their excellence. So I think on that, I want to finish our moderated panel discussion with a question on what does it really take, not just the mechanisms, but what are the conditions that need to be put in place? And so I'll turn to Mediane.
Maybe, Amélie, I just wanted to add a quick
Yes.
little word to, sorry to interrupt, I really apologize. And at the same time, I saw one of the questions in the Q&A, and Carl and Bill, I think sort of reminded me that we have been discussing the difference and should not distinguish excellence and impact.
Why don't we keep that for our Q&A? I think it's a really good one. It's upvoted, so I have it on my
Perfect, because I think all the importance of valuing societal relevance is exactly there. So
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
Cam Boulet's question definitely is speaking to a lot of us, and we've been threading that needle, but I think we can really sew that quilt and make that pattern
Absolutely.
evident. Thank you.
Thank you.
So back to you, Meidian. You've demonstrated extremely strong leadership in your role as chair of the National Killam Selection Committee, and you had the opportunity to actually work with a funding program to design this fair and effective adjudication process. Now we have the results to show for it. So what would you say were the conditions of success, and what steps can other funders and decision makers take today to improve assessment of research impact? And we have some of those questions in the Q&A, so I think there's going to be a lot of appetite for hearing more about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Amelie. So let's say there's two words, and Bill already talked about one of them. I would say trust and empowerment. So, and in all aspects. So first of all, as Bill mentioned, there's trust within the committee, trust of each other, psychological safety. There's trust in the chairs. And I'd have to say part of our instructions to the committee are explicitly, please leave your academic argumentation behind. We're not here to defend a point. We're here to listen openly to everyone's perspective, especially in this interdisciplinary committee, and see whether or not it should change how we're thinking about a particular candidate's accomplishments. And so I think that level of trust was really felt within the committee. And they were empowered, as Bill said, to at any point bring up an issue, bring up a file that they thought didn't get quite enough discussion, bring up the fact that we're drifting away from the criteria. And that really was encouraged. And then there's the trust and the empowerment from the Killam Trust themselves, from the advisory board, and from the National Killam Program Office. They empowered us as chairs with having a really clear set of guidelines and goals. Here's where this process is aiming to get. And that meant that we felt free to devise a process that would move us towards it in an evidence-informed way. And we were literally empowered to do that. I remember at one point early in the process, we were sitting together, the National Killam Program Office and I, and realized that the committee wanted to know more about community-engaged research. And at that point, there was no opportunity to provide a statement on your community engagement. And so we added it. Right? So it is not a fixed process. It is one that should be organic. As your committee says to you, you know what piece of information we're really missing here? You should add it to the process. And I think that's why it's such a transparent and comprehensive set of facts and videos. The other thing that I think is important, in addition to the fact that the chairs are non-voting, and so the committee comes to believe that we are really just guarding the process. We're not having our own axe to grind or any particular candidate we're trying to advocate for. We're trying to summarize what we're hearing. We also had very specific education for the committee, and I don't call it training because it's really, here's the ways in which we see bias manifesting in the literature, including things like this is the kind of language you might read that typically is associated with people from this population group more so than this other population group, and here's how it affects your assessment of them. And so I do remember one time that I thought was successful when we were discussing a particular file and there was debate on the impact of someone's work. And someone said, well, this language was used in one of the letters. And someone else said, isn't that one of the examples we got in our training sessions of using negative language to describe a positive outcome? And so I think the committee really took that to heart, and that was great. And then the final thing I would say is the structure of the committee is an interdisciplinary one, but also one where we have people with institutional knowledge and turnover. So Bill mentioned he's at, I think, his third year or second year. We'll have new folks this year. The new folks will come in and question every aspect of the process. The people who've been there longer may sometimes need reminding about the specifics of why they're assessing particular ways, and together they work really well. But the main thing really, I think, is the trust of the committee in the process. If they don't think it's fair, if they don't think privacy is maintained, these are not colleagues who came on saying, I want to do a brand new process that is DORA aligned. These are just colleagues who are excellent examples of accomplishments in their field from every field, right? They didn't come in wanting to do this process, but they were open to it. And that means we had to make sure they trusted the process, that it was fair, that we were safeguarding their integrity as we did it. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. It's a key feature of the program and one that makes it so strong. I remember I have key instances in my mind of also self-policing in the committee of like, reminder. And so thank you with that, Median, and thank you to all colleagues from the panel for answering these questions, lending yourselves to this exercise. And so now we're getting to the audience Q&A, and thank you to the audience for putting in your questions and upvoting some of those questions. So we will go with your choices for the questions that were upvoted. So the first one is from Cam Boulet with a rejoinder from Tom Barber. So I'll read out the question and I'll let my colleagues unmute and jump in to ask to answer. So the terms research excellence and impact have been used somewhat interchangeably, even in the talk's title. What does the panel see as the difference between the two, and more specifically, comments on how impact can or is measured? And what does this holistic assessment mean? So we have had, I think, a little bit of that throughout the various contributions from colleagues, but maybe if someone wants to take the mic and dig a little deeper in that. Carl, Median, Bilkis, Bill, who wants to jump in? Go ahead, Median.
I will start quickly and then leave it to my colleagues to comment. I don't think they're different. I think we have a term that we've used traditionally, and it's in all of every university's guidelines for tenure, for example, which is excellence, research excellence. I think the way that we've thought about it is something that's restricted to the academy for many years. And some of that, those metrics are perfectly reasonable, right? We do want to have an influence on the field. We do want to see that you've discovered something new in physics that is then cited 1,000 times. That's fantastic indication that you've had an impact on your field. The point is that there's many, many ways that our research can have impact or be excellent. And I use them interchangeably because I think what we need to do is ask someone, what is it you're trying to accomplish that will impact the world? It may be through impacts on scholarly fields. It may be through impacts on communities. It may be when your work goes into a patent. And so I think not being hung up on the terminologies, but instead asking, what are you trying to accomplish that will change things? Why will things be different when you leave than when you got here? I guess that's how I think of it.
And if I can add also, as a sociologist who does applied work, I think there's been in some disciplines a bit of a down view on applied/impact in the real world research. And so I think this is also a rebalancing of that. And that's why you're hearing it also in our wording. Impact is really important. And we are getting back to the principles, as I said, the elevated, inspiring words of Dorothy Killam, that this research should contribute to Canada, the building of Canada's future by encouraging advanced studies. I think that was really inspiring already at the time. Carl, you wanted to come in, and Bill too. These
Yeah.
are our main questions. Yeah.
You know, I'm also thinking that excellence and evidence of excellence is impact. I would think, and therefore, you see, using them interchangeably, understand there, because we could see how, when we think of impact, what is it that we're expecting it to do for the community, for the society, for people. So I see them, and that's impact is one of the factors that we can say, oh yes, it's excellent. And we do that in our everyday, lives, actually, when we think of, yeah, that's excellent because it has had an impact.
And sometimes also, I don't mean to say that it's only applied research that will have an impact, but because we do celebrate fundamental research and, sometimes, let's say, historical research that sheds some light on what we understand, what we're living through today, resonates much. It feels like the wheel of history is turning. Bill, you wanted to add something too.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is within the scoring rubric for the Killam Prize, there's a clear signaling of impact. It's one of the three pillars in the rubric, and I just want to share this with folks. Is that in terms of impact, the definition or the language in the rubric is that the nomination package clearly demonstrates the contribution of the candidate's ideas and research results to Canadian society, including the nation's intellectual and/or cultural life, as well as international stature where appropriate. So that's sort of our guiding light. in terms of impact. But I agree with my colleagues in terms of the the interplay between research excellence and impact.
Absolutely. Yes, Bilkis.
Alors, je vais juste compléter. Je trouve que c'est une très bonne. Merci, Bill, de nous ramener justement aux critères de la fondation. Et bien sûr, Médiane, moi, je suis tout à fait d'accord avec votre introduction sur le fait que les deux concepts sont interreliés et qu'on ne peut pas faire fi de rigueur et de crédibilité. Je pense que la notion d'excellence et d'impact nous ramène à ça. Puis rapidement, pour dire que c'est dans cette perspective-là, de ce que tout à l'heure on avait discuté par rapport à la recherche en partenariat, que les approches qualitatives aussi deviennent importantes à considérer. Les récits d'impact qu'on voit dans les dossiers, de ce que Bill nous décrit, les études de cas, les témoignages, les évaluations contextualisées, nous aident beaucoup comme membres à distinguer justement les dimensions qui sont parfois difficiles à quantifier, mais néanmoins, je dirais, hautement significatifs. Alors, merci.
Merci, Bilkis, en effet. So next we have a question by Kevin Lapointe. So looking ahead, how might the growing use of AI in research applications shape our understanding of research excellence, and how should peer review processes adapt to maintain equitable and unbiased statement? And Median kind of like jumped on our back end conversation that she was hoping to have that question asked and answered. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Amelie. I've been thinking about, everyone's been thinking about this a lot. Right now, and it's true that the applications of AI will continue to grow. Some of what the committee does is cross-reference what people are saying against what is actually in their CVs. And you can use as many highfalutin and lovely words as you want. You can weave it into the best sentences ever, but if it's not documented in your CV and also represented in your methodologies that you're proposing, you're not going to be ranked highly by this committee. So I think one of the things that the use of AI to create applications should be doing, and to be honest, in the classroom, ooh, I said it, is causing us to think more about what the person is trying to communicate rather than how they're communicating it. The other advantage of this, of course, is with respect to Bilkis's comment about French language applications. And I would also say I don't discuss English language learners, but multilingual people who are forced to write in English are often at a disadvantage because of how much emphasis we put on whether or not this sounds like a scholarly document. Right? I think that has to disappear because anyone can put it through an AI filter and get the right tone. And so I think that can be a good thing. It forces us to say, we're not going to look at how they're saying it, we're looking at what they're saying, and then we're cross-referencing it to the evidence in the file or into the candidate's materials. So thanks.
Yeah, and if I may, there's almost you can, I'm hopeful that we can sniff out some of it. Certainly there's, yeah, maybe not. But there is a sense in the committee that some applications were meant for other competitions perhaps. And so there is definitely a sense of this is truly a Killam application. So there is that kind of committee understanding as well. But yeah, can we detect a human? Maybe it changes so fast, right? Any other colleagues want to speak to that one? Yeah, I think it's going to be, it's our big challenge ahead for our core business in academia and beyond, of course. So we have another really important question.
Maybe I can just add
yes,
a quick thing about the fact that when your last words, Amelia, are very important, in terms of the challenge ahead. I guess I would like to just leave a little note in terms of caution that we don't want our community-based approaches and the time that it takes to build relationship and trust in building science taken over by AI. I guess it seems to me that we may fall into a competitive stage at that point. So I just feel like, everything will be important and we want to make sure that we don't lose the voices really that help us, contribute to the quality of science.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be a test of our institutions to see how we rise to that challenge. Speaking of institutions, one of our attendees has a question regarding resistance, which we saw in the poll was named as a key feature or a key barrier. So the question reads, resistance from institutions is a big barrier to advancing inclusive excellence. Typically, institutions respond to funder evaluation and process, and we're very, just side note for me, we're very, very aware of this, that we contribute to defining excellence in our work. And so that's why we want to be hyper transparent about it. And researchers have shared that they continue to use traditional metrics and applications despite the program's focus on inclusive excellence because reviewers still take these into account and they are discussed. Are there any thoughts on how this may change in the future? I may take chair's prerogative and add a little bit here that I think the Tri-Council move to narrative CVs is going to be a big shift in that assessment, that capacity for assessment for the story that folks are bringing to their research. So definitely that is, from my standpoint, one of the big shifts that's coming online soon to an application near you, if it hasn't already. So folks, did you want to speak to this? And I think there's also questions in the chat. We won't be able to get to all the questions, but there's questions of like resourcing also in research support services. Maybe this is a question that can bring some of those threads together. Carl, Bill. Yes, Bill, go ahead.
Yeah. I'll only add that I completely understand the question, and in terms of the resistance and the dynamic that can occur and among reviewers in terms of their review of a file. I think one possible way to deal with that is to ensure that there are face-to-face meetings. And face-to-face discussions. I've been involved in some adjudications where you just send in your rankings and that's it. Partially as a result of the time it takes to sort of get a group of people to meet. But I think one of the added values of the approach, the Killam approach that we've been talking about is having everyone in the room discussing a file, and also having a chair and a co-chair who are on top of everything in terms of where the discussion is going. And if the discussion is meant to be a more fair, holistic view of a file, but it is gravitating towards standard academic metrics, folks jump in. And to Carl's earlier point, we're brought back to our guiding principles of inclusive collaborator, barrier breaker, and research leader in terms of looking at those values. So I think having a set of values or attributes that guide the adjudication process, I think might help in terms of moving more towards the type of review that we're talking about, and perhaps that would lessen the resistance.
I also think there was
Carl.
one of the questions was about in-person versus virtual.
Yes.
And I think one of the things you mentioned, Bill, just now is how sometimes these in-person contact relationship also can help in the process of how we adjudicate these things.
Well, I think I was going to speak to that as well, Carl, because to my surprise, so I was an in-person, a CIHR panel reviewer for 7 years in person. When they moved to online, I thought the world was broken. It was a little bit, but for the different reasons. But I think the key here is in the same room and synchronous. And so I do feel that we have built a process. It's a virtual process. So the Killam process is virtual meetings. So that's also why we say it can be not that expensive. And so this is one way we save money, but I think the trust building still happens through that synchronous and certainly the wading through together. So time, again, Bill's point about time is important. And Tom has a question also on how much time we invest in training, review, and discussion. I don't know if we want to, I have a quantification for me, but I don't know if I want to say it out loud. Bilkis?
I just wanted to add to the previous point is it's also very respectful to some of our committee members who had requested to be online only. So it's it's an inclusive process that allows us to be synchronous despite our time differences. And, we start also based on where we are located in our big country. And the other thing I wanted to say is that to build on what Bill just said, is that within my own institution, I bring them those criteria. So what does it mean to be an inclusive researcher, a barrier breaker? What are those words meaning? So that, in response to the question of resistance, is to go back to our institutions and also to one of the questions earlier about what do we learn, and sort of discuss with our institution about what does that mean, and how do we build, the confidence in those who are in our institution, who could be eligible to submit. And let's not just put a sort of a, blank, very personalized statement, but actually look at what the person is doing, even though we never thought they were barrier breakers. So I think that's how we will build, progressively, and that's what Killam is teaching us to some extent, right? To go back to our institutions.
Yes, absolutely. And for you all working in this sphere or wanting to work in this sphere of pursuing this, it's also to build it up from the ground from your institutions. Médiane, you wanted to add something?
Thanks, Emily. And yeah, I agree with what everything our colleagues are saying. And I just want to say the comment about the tri-agencies, you said, Emily, the narrative CV is pulling people into this. I would say more than that, we should be advising researchers in our institutions to be heading towards a narrative CV anyway. I've been doing that for years. When I was a vice dean, I said you should have narrative, a few sentences framing what you're about to have someone read in each section of your CV. And in that section, if someone's a non-traditional researcher, they should be citing papers that say that H-index is not a good measure in my field, or describing why it is that the particular type of impact that they have should be assessed in this particular way. So I think part of the problem is that people fall back on what is traditional because they don't have the information to do it any other way. So you need to give them the information. And I would say researchers are eager for it. I had a joke in my department because my CVs, my bars are a particular color to define my sections. I give my CV to every new faculty member and say, see how I did this narrative? You could do something like this if you want. And my chair said, how come everyone's CV has this particular color in it now? So if you give people models, they will use it and they will do it to their advantage.
That is so powerful. Thank you, Médiane. I think that probably is where we need to end, unfortunately. But yes, the power of templates and examples, leading by example, which you have done in spades, I think is really critical. And I, as a side note, anecdotally, I started doing that myself too, but only to make sense of what I was a while ago, right? But to make sense of what I was doing, because one line is not equivalent to another line. And then I was like, that's not fair representation of the story of what we do. So yeah,
We'll have more pages in French, Amélie, than in English.
Yes, but still, because it takes 20% more words to speak in French. So it's demonstrated. It's not just for privilege. So folks, I am this is so excruciating. There are so many other questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much for engaging with this talk and with the thoughtful ways that you have brought here. So please fill out our feedback poll. And so I will bring us to a close for this for today. By saying that we have, I think, obviously we've covered a lot of ground. And what I hope has come through is that the gap between aspiring to equitable assessment and actually achieving it some of it comes down to design. It comes down to determining the principles that you want to espouse, as Bill has said, attributes, and designing the process around that. So deliberate, evidence-informed, consistently applied design. And the Killam process, for me, demonstrates something really important. You can build an adjudication system that preserves the value of expert judgment while substantially reducing the channels through which bias flows. And when you look at the data, with that honesty and act on what they show, you don't sacrifice excellence, you find more of it. Donc, ce que le programme Killam nous démontre, c'est que l'excellence et l'équité ne sont pas des valeurs concurrentes, ce sont des valeurs qui se renforcent mutuellement, à condition qu'on conçoive des processus d'évaluation à la hauteur de cet idéal. So a question for me is not whether we the question I would like to leave you with is not whether our institutions can do this, is whether we choose to. So my sincere thanks to Mediane, Cal, Bilkis, and Bill for the rigor and the generosity you've brought to this work over 3 years and for sharing it so openly today. I also want to recognize the work of the trustees of the program, their openness, and the team of the National Killam Program au Conseil National de Recherche Canada. Their dedication to the data, the process, and getting this right has made this research possible. So this work is truly collaborative in the fullest sense. And thank you all for joining us today and for the quality of your engagement, and the CSPC for running such a smooth session. And on that, on time, we'll just close and wish you a good rest of your day. Thank you, folks.